Activity theory is an idea that developed in the 1920s, and a key player in the development of activity theory was Lev Vygotsky. There are two fundamental assumptions that underpin activity theory. One is knowledge is mediated through tools and artefacts, and the second is that the basic unit of analysis is what's defined as an activity. An activity can be anything from something quite large to something quite small. Activity theory has been popular behind what we knew as the Iron Curtain since the 1920s, but it never really got to the West until the 1970s. And Engström has been particularly influential in popularising the idea of activity theory. What activity theory proposes is that tools, artefacts, symbols mediate between the subject and the object. The subject really refers to who is the important actor or actors in this particular activity, and whose perspective are we wanting to look from. Now, the object is essentially the objective. What are we trying to achieve here? It's basically about individual activity. It doesn't really take into account what happens when you put people in a collective. Second generation activity builds on the work of first generation, but it puts a base on it. And what that base is about is the notion that activity, collective activity. And second generation is the idea that when an activity is undertaken, there are a set of rules that are either implicit or explicit that will influence the way in which that activity occurs. That there is a community of actors who are involved. And the other addition is this division of labour, which refers to who does what. So how is the labour of the activity broken up? The purpose of this exercise is to make explicit these ideas of what are the tools, who are the subjects, what are the objects, what are the rules, community and division of labour. So what it gives you is 8 categories of information to work with. This particular analysis was about use of reusable learning objects, and the object of the exercise was to find reusable object components so that they could be used in new course material. In this case, the subject is the learning object librarian. This is a particular individual, and the tools that they're using to try and find reusable components are these search engines. Now, the rules are that permission for use must be sought. Search must satisfy instructor's needs, no requirement for or checks on object search. In other words, there's an authorisation process. The community of practice involved in this are the object workers, the IT designers and the researchers. As a result of this particular activity, what they identified was 3 sets of contradictions, and they're identified here as 1, 2 and 3. One is about the librarian needing to be able to find usable components. In terms of the division of labour, the role of the librarian doing that was not documented in any of the processes. In terms of the community of practice, you'll see that the librarian doesn't even exist. And this other one is about permissions being needed. So every time the librarian wants to do something, you have to seek permission from someone else. So this is about problem solving, and this is often how activity theory is used. Third generation activity theory is based on the idea that you can have 2 activity systems, and that when they come into interaction, the objects start to interact. And the final bit of this puzzle is to say that if the people involved in the 2 activity systems engage in open discussion, open debate, open reflection on practice, then there's the potential for what's called expansive learning, which is essentially to say then the potential for learning beyond what would have been capable with those groups working separately, because it allows people from the different activity systems to understand better what's happening in that other world. Let me just give you an example of the idea of sustainable e-learning. There are 3 main perspectives that you've got to look from in order to achieve sustainability in the implementation of e-learning. And they are the organisational perspective, technological and the pedagogic perspectives. Now, each of those perspectives are actually interested in different things. So at an organisational level, and as representative management, fundamentally their role is about organisational sustainability from a physical, financial and human resource perspectives. The second perspective is the technological perspective. And these are usually represented by people in IT department. And what they're there for is to look after the technical sustainability of the systems and processes of e-learning. And finally, the pedagogic perspective, which is largely represented by the teachers. And really what their aim in terms of is trying to maintain sustainability in what I've called here the dominant pedagogic approach. Now, in each of these three cases, what I'm arguing is that the object is to increase e-learning. The reason that you're trying to increase e-learning differs from the different perspectives. In the organisational perspective, the reason for increasing e-learning is to maintain organisational sustainability. That might mean decreasing costs, increasing student numbers. I've mentioned before the tools available to the organisation are physical, financial and human resource. Now, and there are a number of rules and regulations that organisations have to comply with. Many of these are associated with government policy. There are also legal and social obligations that they have to meet in terms of community standards and not discriminating against groups of people. From the organisation's point of view, the rules are often reflected in the strategic plan. And in terms of the community, there are a range of players involved at an organisational level. They include senior, middle, management, support staff, teach, customers, clients. And what's fallen off the slide here is the division of labour. And what I generally would say about the management of publicly funded organisations is it's generally hierarchical. Now, if we look at the technological activity system, we've still got increased e-learning as the object, but in this case we've got an outcome which is technological sustainability. The sort of tools at their disposal are things like hardware, software, and I've also put influence here because it's reasonably easy to argue that in most educational organisations the technological people have a seat at senior management table. So they have a direct relationship with senior management and they're actually very influential in the way that resources get allocated. The rules that they need to engage with include things like standard operating procedures and standards. And the people involved in it include the programmers, developers, designers. And the division of labour has dropped off this slide as well. Typically, the more senior people in the technological activity systems tend to have very specialist sort of jobs. So they either work on hardware or software, particular sorts of hardware or particular sorts of software. And as you come down to the operative, they tend to work across a whole load of different... From the point of view of the pedagogic activity system, the outcome is pedagogic sustainability. The tools include things like curriculum, learning and teaching resources. The rules that are at play here are sometimes quite explicit. Rules that are to do with curriculum, rules that are to do with external accreditation, but there are also a set of implicit rules, and they are things like discipline norms. And as individuals, we also have a set of personal beliefs about what constitutes good teaching. It would be possible to do an analysis of organisational, technological or pedagogic activity systems, say what, if any, are the tensions or contradictions that exist between these particular categories of tools, object, subject, rules, community and division of labour. I'm not focusing on that here. What I'm focusing on is the tensions that exist when you put the organisational, technological and pedagogic perspectives together. What tensions and contradictions start to emerge? And the argument is that it's possible, given discussion, debate and reflection, that you can end up with a much better outcome. And in the paper I've talked about some of the tensions that become quite explicit. So to conclude, activity theory, that it is quite a powerful tool that provides an external language of description and an analytical technique to identify tensions and contradictions that are involved in issues and problems that can arise. So it moves your analysis beyond pure description to another level.